and then turn it over to Sally.
Great, thank you, Sue. So we're so happy that Dustyn is here with us tonight after celebrating this great birthday, and also this little bill 305 that I think we'll learn a little bit more about. Dustyn is the advocacy and outreach organizer for the Sierra Club Delaware chapter, and he works for the Sierra Club full-time and spends most of his time focusing on energy and climate across the state. SB 305 is the Delaware Climate Change Solutions Act, and it is hot off the press. And I expect that we'll learn a little bit more about it tonight. So welcome and thank you, Dustyn.
Yeah, thanks. So I got a PowerPoint. So if I can,
you should be able to share.
Yeah, we can do that. But I won't. So I guess we'll maybe save questions for the end, because I don't think once I hit the slideshow, I can still see a couple people. But if there's like questions or something, I'm more than happy to be interrupted. So, you know, we got around together on this issue. So the Sierra Club, you know, is partnered with a number of different organizations, you know, to rally around the idea of doing something about the climate emergency. And that, you know, that phrase, you know, climate emergency, we've been calling, you know, we've been saying climate change, climate crisis, and it's like, it's, you know, it's continuously escalating, right? And so the climate emergency was kind of like what we centered around, and our focus has been, and we started out by talking about declaring a climate emergency, as Hawaii did, and a number of other nations have done, the US not being one of them, obviously. And about 2,100 nations and jurisdictions across the globe, as of last month, have declared a climate emergency. Our neighbor to the north, Canada, is the closest one to us, but there's a number of jurisdictions in the US that have also done it, New York City being probably the most populated. So, but when we talked about doing a climate emergency declaration, we found out that on the state and local level, that doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't give anybody like police powers that they wouldn't already have. And it doesn't do anything like we saw during COVID or a natural disaster, you know, big storm or hurricane or what have you. On the national level, it does. It gives additional policing power to the president and can help with domestic production of certain goods for, say, renewable energy. It can do a number of things on the national level, but locally it doesn't. So, okay, then what do we have to do to really recognize the situation we're in, but then also do something that's going to take and create action and opportunity for future action? So we're missing some foundational stuff here in Delaware. What is it? How do we fix it? And that's what I'm going to talk to you all about. So I want to talk about what greenhouse gases are, what greenhouse gas goals are, what a climate directive is, because that's a new term for a lot of folks, and then the need for planning and reporting. So when we talk about greenhouse gases, we're talking about a specific set of pollutants. So we're not talking about things like ethylene oxide, horrible pollutant, very carcinogenous, and we've had some issues with it, to say the least, here in Delaware. But that's not what we're talking about. We're specifically talking about these four things: methane, carbon, fluorinated gases, and nitrous oxides. So fluorinated gases are the ones I think most people are the least familiar about. The best example of that was, you may remember back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, we were developing this giant hole in the ozone layer. And we found out that it was from a compound that falls under fluorinated gases, HFCs, I believe is the name of them. And it was found primarily in aerosols. And so the world got together and said, okay, well, we're going to stop using those. And they did. And the ozone layer healed and the hole closed. It went back to manageable. So that's, the best example of fluorinated gases. By concentrate, those are actually the most harmful. They have the highest greenhouse gas potential. So, okay, those are the specific emissions. How do we reduce them? Generally, it varies from state to state, but it's usually a mix of policies like legislation and administrative actions. So Governor Carney just signed us on to the zero emission vehicle mandate. That's administrative action that can reduce emissions. This bill, right, that we're going to talk about tonight, the Climate Change Solution Act, that's a legislative action. So 24 states have some sort of greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Those can be legislative or executive. We have reduction goals, but they're executive, which means the next governor could come in and say, no, we're not doing that anymore, and pull us out of whatever agreement that we have. So they're not good to be done executively. But if you have a legislature that's not cooperating with you, that's generally why that happens. And they're usually done in 5 to 10 year intervals. So you have some short-term goals and then long-term goals. So what should our goals be? Well, we did a climate action plan. It started during Trump's presidency, towards the beginning of 2019, end of 2018. And they were doing a lot of extraordinarily complex modeling to find out what are our scenarios under different emission reduction targets in terms of sea level rise, precipitation, temperature volatility. And they said, okay, we really need to go for the gold here, because even the low emission modeling was not good for Delaware. So they modeled 20 actions under the assumption of certain things. For example, Trump is president. So they assumed that Trump was going to be president for the coming years, and that he was going to continue to roll back kind of federal environmental protections and kind of not help the states at all. Obviously, things have changed. So Biden, when he took office, he did a huge press release on climate change around his Build Back Better bill. And he said, we're going to get to 50 to 52% reductions by 2030. And we need to really be net zero no later than 2050. That was nationally. So the goals in this bill are 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And I'm sorry, I'm going to quit. I don't know if you guys can see what I did there, but I had to shut my email so I stopped getting dinged. So net zero versus 90%. It's going to be probably a topic of conversation. So let you guys know, net zero doesn't actually mean much. So you could be a net zero state, of which there are many, at 2050, but only reduce your emissions by 75%. And that's a fairly common number, actually. That's not great, right? Because we're still emitting, we're just counting on some future technology to save the day. Carbon capture, planting a bunch of trees, something from Elon Musk, who knows? I don't know. Some future thing that we don't have right now. That's not really a good way to plan. You really want to set a hard number, and that way you have that hard goal, but it needs to be high enough that it allows you to compensate for any differences. So 90%, so there's one state that is higher than 90%, that's Washington State at 95%. Every other state is below 90%. So this, aside from Washington, would be the strongest goals in the nation. But there's some clarity there, or some qualifiers there. So if we do net zero, that 10% is the hardest bit, right? That's like your aviation, that's like the things that are really hard to decarbonize. So some degree of carbon capture is always going to be necessary because we're always going to have some sort of emissions from these greenhouse gases from cow farts and planes and other things. So we have to have some sort of capturing technology, and that's that 10%. But what is really important is, what do you count in your emissions? For example, do you count agriculture? Do you count manufacturing? Do you count if you produce the energy in state? Does that count? If you produce your energy out of state and ship it in, does the out of state energy count? Right? A number of states respond to those questions in very different ways, and mostly politically. So Maryland, for example, has this great goal, 60% by 2031, but they carve out manufacturing entirely. Manufacturing emissions don't count. That becomes a little bit easier to attain when you don't have to count manufacturing. They also carve out agriculture. Again, it's a big industry in Delaware and Western Maryland. So by not counting those, how much does that 60% count? I'm not, poo-pooing on Maryland, rock and roll Maryland. But our bill has zero carve-outs. It counts everything. It doesn't matter where the energy is produced. If it's coming and being used in Delaware, it counts. Agriculture counts. All industry counts. All transportation counts. And deforestation counts against us. So this is beyond just these numbers, the boldest greenhouse gas emission reductions in the nation, period, because there's no carve-outs. That's huge. So just got to throw that out there. So moving on, climate directives. So essentially the problem that we have in Delaware is that state agencies are not considering climate change. So you think about the Public Service Commission. So that's a lot of our regulations around energy use in Delaware. They are not allowed to consider climate change. They are not allowed to consider greenhouse gases. That's a big problem if we want to meet these goals. So the solution's pretty easy. You mandate that they do. And so the bill has several climate directives. So just as a couple examples, actually, we're going to get to the examples in a minute. So first, I want to talk a little bit about planning and reporting. So there's a few things that DNREC has to do in the bill. So they have to, right, we define what greenhouse gases are, everything. They have to take an inventory of that. What is our greenhouse gas inventory? So that way we have benchmarks to go by and see our progress of, how much are we deforesting, which counts against us? How much are we reducing, which counts for us? And then we have to report, they have to report on that progress every 2 years. Now, when they're doing that reporting, they have to consult with all the state agencies to find out what they are doing, issues around implementation, issues around equity, what actions are you taking internally, and when the data is there, how much emissions has that reduced in your department? And what are the roadblocks? What do we need to do to help you get there if you're having trouble? So that comes every 2 years. Every 5 years, DNREC has to update the climate action plan. Now, the process is very similar to what we saw during the last climate action plan, except we were able to negotiate some changes to codify best practices. So, for example, not a lot of people knew what was happening in that plan until after the plan was done. And then there were some comment periods at the end, which ultimately didn't really change a lot. And then the plan was released almost a year later. So what we said is that during the planning process, you have to have public comment periods, not at the end. And when you're doing the planning, you have to consult with overburdened communities that have been historically harmed by climate change to make sure their needs are being met and that emissions are being reduced equitably. And so in addition, they also have to consult with all the state agencies again to find out, again, what changes need to be made to get folks in those agencies over the humps that they face. This bill also recreates what was called the Delaware Energy Office. So some folks that have been in this realm for a while may have heard about that before. Essentially, there was nobody manning the ship, steering the ship, and they kind of went away. So this brings that back. It tasks a singular person. Right now, that would be Dana Cobb, the director of the Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy. And instead of saying they had to facilitate the creation of a comprehensive energy plan, they are tasked with creating it. They have to create it, not facilitate somebody else to do it. They have to do it. So you have now the Energy Office is back. It has a person steering the ship, and it is mandated that they create this 5-year comprehensive energy plan. So that's a huge change, along with all these other changes, but it sets the stage for a lot of possibilities for the environmental community to really get what we need to get these goals met and to help bolster renewable energy in Delaware. So big things over at DNREC. On the state agency side, so the state agency directives state that they need to review, anytime a bill like this passes, they have to review their planning and regs and programs and identify changes that need to be made as a result of the bill. And so part of that is to identify actions for emission reductions. They have to incorporate the climate action plan and the greenhouse gas goals in their rulemaking and decision-making, in any future or amended current regulations. And this is big, they cannot pass, and it's pretty explicit on this, they cannot pass any regulations that would impact our ability to meet the greenhouse gas goals. That's pretty significant. So we went from they're not even allowed to think about it to you have to think about it and you can't actually go against us. That's a 180-degree sea change. So the last one I'll mention, there's a few, but so when they create new state buildings, when they purchase new vehicles for their fleet, when they buy paper, anything that they do internally for the agency has to be done not just with the emission reduction goals in mind, but the lowest emission option that is economically feasible. And so it doesn't say they have to buy Teslas, right? But you got to buy a Bolt if you want a new vehicle for your fleet, because Bolts are the same price as what we were buying, right? And it's the lowest emission option. They could do a Nissan Leaf as well at about the same price. So again, this is huge. If we can make, and things will become and are already cost competitive and will be more so in the future, we are transitioning everything we do at the state level to low emission. The lowest emissions possible is what the bill says. And so those are the state directives that I mentioned, and they are beyond anything that we even fathom that we were going to see in legislation. And certainly one of the biggest pushbacks from the opposition to the bill. Now, you're going to hear this like a blank check sort of situation. It may sound like what I just said was. This doesn't remove anything that they have to consider now. So it doesn't say, for the public service mission, you no longer consider the impacts to ratepayers, to Delmarva customers. You don't think about that anymore. You only think about climate change. It doesn't do that. they still have to consider ratepayer impact. But alongside that, on an equal playing field, they have to consider the greenhouse gas goals, right? So it's not a blank check, but we also know that all these things are either already or will be cost competitive. And so it's going to go green, right? And so we're not removing consumer protections. We're just leveling the playing field for our planet. So in order to ensure that we have the transparency and the accountability we need this planning and reporting, this every 2 years reporting. It's a lot. It's going to be a lot of staff time on the state level, but we can't get to 2030 or 2029 and we didn't have this reporting. And oh, we're not going to make it. The state is legally obligated, if this bill passes, to reach these goals. One of the headlines of the bill is the state shall pass policies to attain these goals, right? They don't do that, they open themselves up for lawsuits. We don't want that. We want them to do it. So we need to know how our progress is going. We need that accountability and that transparency. It's really important. And additionally, agencies, they're going to know way more than DNRAC or you and I what they need and what their challenges are going to be around equity or red tape. So it's really, they're really important components, and they are getting some pushback, but they're vital to make sure that we're doing this right. That's my last slide, and then hopefully there's a bunch of questions. So there's a number of different ways that you can help. Top line, we got a rally on June 9th. There's a committee hearing on June 8th. If it passes in committee, it's highly possible that we have a rally on the 9th at 11 a.m. Rah, rah, rah. You got to get a vote on this bill. And then so the plan is to go inside and line the, what's it called up top? The stands, I don't know. Up top in the Senate, we're all wearing green and blue. And, we want to vote. So it's very possible that we could get a vote that day. So we can rally, rah, 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 and then go maybe grab some lunch, come back, and we might get a vote. So it's really important that we show up to make sure that happens, because we only have 1 week in the House. So if we don't get a vote on the 9th in the Senate, we don't get the bills to the House in time. And in order for it to pass in the House, they would have to suspend rules to bring it to the floor, which is not a place you want to be. And so that's why we're doing it on the 9th. It's the last day for a vote in the Senate that we could possibly do. We got to get that vote. So number one, come to the rally on the 9th at 11 a.m. at Legislative Hall, wear green or blue. This beautiful QR code, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the QR code. I can put the actual link in the chat after we're done. But there's a letter writing tool, where you just put in your name and info, and it tells you who your legislators are, and you can type if you want, or you just hit send, and then an email goes off to your legislators. Do that. We didn't get as many co-sponsors as we were hoping, so it's certainly not a sure thing, particularly in the House. So those letters, there's a lot of noise, right? Not noise, it's a bad connotation. There's a lot of competing interests right now in Legislative Hall. If this is your interest and this is what you want to make sure is done by the end of the year, one of the things, those letters make a difference. Talk to your legislators one-on-one. Obviously, that's better than a letter. And then spreading the action, right? The rally, the letter writing tool, with personal interactions, even a text to one-on-one text to your family or friends, way better than a social media post. But if that's what you can do, share it on social media or via email. So that's a lot. That's a lot of asks, I know, but we're in crunch time. So I'll put the link of the rally and the letter writing tool in the chat here. And thank you all very much for inviting me out to pontificate at you for half an hour.
Dustyn, I have a question. Which committee, it's in committee now in the Senate? And which committee is that?
Yeah, Senate Energy and Environment.
Uh,
That's Senator Hansen's committee and Trey Party's committee. They're both on board. We're not. So the trick with the committee is that sometimes on controversial bills, which this unfortunately is to some folks, other legislators listen in. And so if all they hear is opposition, that's not good. And so while we have the votes in committee, we cannot rest on our laurels, as they say. We gotta still show up, comment in favor of the bill, and make sure that those legislators hear positive remarks. I can share the link to register for the committee hearing as well.
And comments should go to our senators, representatives, but also to folks on the committee.
I wouldn't worry about the folks on the committee itself. It's the folks listening to the committee that we're really worried about. So by sending a letter to your representatives, senator representative, that's sufficient. I mean, if you want to send another one, you know, I'm not saying don't do it, but yeah.
Dustyn, that link isn't clickable for some reason.
Yeah, I know. How disappointing is that? So I'm not sure what's up with that. I can't really do anything about it, but the caps matter. So the capital letter, you have to capitalize the letters that I capitalize.
The QR code seemed to work.
Yeah. The QR code should take you to the same action as the last link that I shared. And hey, there's one that's clickable. So that's the registration for the committee hearing. If anybody wants.
Is some of that on Sierra Club's website?
So everything except for the committee hearing link, which I'll get to after. I've just been in meetings back to back since they published that. So, but everything else is, yeah, right on the main page, right at the top, along with some fact sheets. So the nice thing is the opposition's been pretty vocal about why they're opposing the bill. And so we were able to make a fact sheet debunking the myths of why they're opposing it. And so that's on the website as well.
Is it the usual cast of characters that are in opposition?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Caesar Rodney Institute, the utilities. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if the farming community, like commercial ag, has noticed that they're not carved out, because they've been awfully quiet, and that's surprising to me. So I'm not shouting that from the rooftops, but it's yeah, we'll see.
So in trickle down, how does this go to a county level?
Yeah, so one of the agencies is the Office of State Planning. So every comprehensive plan has to report to the Office of State Planning. The Office of State Planning is going to have to change their requirements for comprehensive planning to include climate change in these greenhouse gas goals, which means the counties are going to have to, when they do their comp plan updates, do the same. It also will trickle down through some permitting and through DENREC probably in land use.
Is this going to lead to people suddenly saying, I need to bulldoze that forest before it counts?
Well, it'll count the day this is passed. So
okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. We're I don't want to detract away from this bill, but we will be working next year on a solution for that problem.
Dustyn, looking ahead to the rally, I know that climate emergency, that particular phrase did not make it into the bill. Are we allowed to use that phrase on signs that we might bring with us?
Yeah, so I guess I didn't mention that. So we didn't give up on that though. So when we had it in the bill, again, it doesn't carry any power aside from a recognition, but it puts it in the legislative record, which is, it's important. So we're not done on that front. We've been trying to coax some legislators. So there's a number of ways to get things in the legislative record. You can put it in legislation, obviously. But also everything that legislators say on the floor goes into the legislative record. And so we're working with some legislators to try and get at least one in each chamber to specifically state that Delaware, as the rest of the world, is facing a climate emergency and that we must act accordingly. So we have not given up on that, and certainly don't want to dissuade anybody from using that kind of language personally. So the issue was COVID numbers are going back up, as you probably are well aware. And the governor was just a little concerned because everybody's freaking out that he's going to do another lockdown and declare another public health emergency. And so he didn't want to fan that fire at all by having a climate emergency declaration, even though it's not the same thing. Try explaining that to the general public that is not in favor.
Okay, so I can go after Bomback and Sokola to see if they will use that language in their whenever they speak.
Sure. Yeah, the House is honestly going to be a little bit the challenge, I think. So we've been talking to Representative Lambert about doing that. There's a few legislators in the Senate, they're like, oh yeah, I'll do that, no problem. But the House has a bad habit of when bills get pushback on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats tend to just zip it and just not say anything. And so, even if it's in one chamber, it still counts. We really would prefer it in both chambers, but if they kind of go into that, zip it mode, the House becomes more of a challenge to have that happen.
Someone mentioned posters, signs, placards. Are these permitted wherever we are going to be on if we go to the rally? Are these things permitted? Is there a size limit? What's the story there?
Yeah, no, completely fine at the rally. You likely will not be allowed to take them in Legislative Hall unless they can be folded up. So yeah, I mean, I've seen folks sneak by with stuff folded up in their pockets, and then they open it up in the stands and may or may not get yelled at by the sergeant at arms.
Okay.
But for the rally itself, it's on the steps of Legislative Hall, and so everything's totally fun. Banners, signs, whatever you want.
Okay.
I see Dave has his hand up.
Yeah, I just Dustyn, I'm maybe late to this, so if everybody already knows the answer to this, I apologize. But could you give us some idea of what kind of changes the Sierra Club would recommend or expects will need to be made to meet the first 2030 target? I mean,
So on the 2030 target, that's actually a little bit easier. It seems like it wouldn't be, but we've actually already modeled what we need to do to meet that goal of 50%. Because we joined ZEV 2, which is more aggressive than ZEV 1 in terms of how many EVs need to be sold. And because of the money coming in from the infrastructure bill that's specifically tied to clean infrastructure, and the projects that we know are going to happen from that, we even with just the 20 actions that they modeled, the numbers actually go up to 50%. And so we know it's in the climate action plan. You can look, they've listed out 20 actions that need to be taken. So just with those 20 actions, we can do the 50% goal.
And I hate to press you on this, and I should probably know it, but maybe to put it in personal terms, what actions are in there that would impact me personally? I mean, do I need to buy an electric vehicle, or what?
Yeah. So, all right. Why don't I do like 3?
Okay.
And then, okay, cool. So I'd mentioned ZEV, so and you mentioned EV, so I'll go down that road first. So ZEV requires manufacturers to sell a certain number of EVs every year, a certain percentage, and the percentage increases every year. And so in order to do that, the manufacturers tend to offer, they tend to send more vehicles to the states that have ZEV, which is why you can't buy an EV in Delaware right now, but you can in all the ZEV states around us. And they tend to offer more rebates and more incentives at the manufacturer level to get those cars unloaded, because they have to pay a fine if they don't meet them. So that doesn't necessarily impact you unless you want to buy an EV, and then it makes it easier for you to do so.
Okay.
And less expensive. So that on the EV side. On the some of the other actions, so energy efficiency is mentioned a number of times. So that's on state buildings, but it's also on utilities as well, and on DENREC to increase the funding and outreach on their energy efficiency programs, to make sure you're doing more weatherization, you're doing more retrofitting, you're doing more incentives on the utility side to do energy efficiency work in your home, so cheaper electric bills. Generally on the consumer side, a lot of it is saving money on consumers to get them to do things. On kind of the power broker side, which is why they don't really like it, it's more of a stick approach than a carrot approach. So what's one more? Wouldn't really necessarily impact you per se, but one of the actions was to increase our renewable portfolio standards again to 50% rather than 40%. So again, that's more on the utility side, from procuring renewable resources, energy resources.
You mean that's the percentage of electricity generated by renewable?
Yeah, percentage of electricity procured, but yeah. So because Delmarva doesn't generate anything, they just buy it. Okay. Yeah. So but it could be good for you, because we've seen in other states that do that, they offer larger grants for people to install solar, or they start doing more strategic planning to do more like community solar. So again, I mean, it could be a benefit. The cost of renewables is increasingly going down, so I don't see it as even with the increase that we just did, the average bill is going to drop about $8 a month by the time we get to 2030. So, and they projected we could even go to 50%. It would still come down about $6 a month. So, and that's with current costs, which are coming down.
I just had one other question. Is you mentioned if you don't meet the targets, a lawsuit could be brought. Does that mean that some judge would be ordering actions to be taken to meet the target? I mean, what happens if targets aren't met? And is the lawsuit the only alternative as to what happens if the targets aren't met?
No, I mean, that's not the only alternative, but that is a possible scenario, because this bill specifically calls on agencies to incorporate these targets. If an agency is not, and we've already seen interagency lawsuits between DENREC and the PSC multiple times in the past, that could happen again if they're not doing what they need to be doing. Certainly a citizen could sue DENREC or the state of Delaware for not meeting its obligation. They would have to prove standing, which is difficult, but not impossible. Particularly if something like the Green Amendment were to pass, then it would be pretty easy.
Who would have standing if not citizen? I mean, who would bring the action to enforce it?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to get back to you. It hasn't happened, so
Okay. Okay.
kind of all theoretical. But I mean, it has happened that the state has been sued for not meeting an obligation.
Yeah, I was just under my impression that the reductions that most nations have committed to have largely not been met, and I wondered sort of what's the enforcement mechanism to, you know, to force people to make change that they're not otherwise prepared to make.
Yeah, the goal should be to never get to that point, which is why we push for reporting every 2 years.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll lower my hand.
Sue, I have a question for you. Has this group talked about speaking of litigation, has this group talked about the film Youth v. Gov, where the 21 youth are suing the federal government because of climate change?
To what group are you referring?
This question is for Sue.
No, I'm not familiar with that. Sally or Roger?
No, we
you?
haven't. I think that lawsuit did fail, didn't it? Finally.
It is actually the first, yes, the first round of it did fail, but they are pursuing other avenues. They had to go back to the original judge, and they are still they're not giving up.
Well, this has been many years, hasn't it?
Yes, yes, it has. Yes,
right.
it has. I think at least 5 that I know of. But yeah, it's on Netflix, and it's very inspiring. If you get a chance to see it, Youth v. Gov, it talks about the kind of litigation that we may be seeing if Green Amendment or the Climate Solutions Bill should pass. So
yeah, it really goes to Dave's question about standing. I think that's the
yeah.
whole issue, isn't it? Who can sue?
Right. I mean, as far as I know, Dustyn, couldn't a citizen, I mean, these are 21 youth that are suing the federal government. Couldn't anybody basically sue?
You can bring a suit, but it can then just get tossed out if you can't prove standing. Standing is the environmentalist's worst nightmare. So many lawsuits have died on standing. There's one that's taken from Audubon, I think they said like 7 years just to get standing. It's that, I'm not, I never want to like down other groups' work that they're doing. The Green Amendment is, it's said to be a lot of things that it may or may not end up being, but one thing it is for sure is a real clear path to standing on just about any environmental issue, which is why DNREC hates the bill, because they know that it makes lawsuits from private citizens extraordinarily easier on environmental issues. So, if something like that were to pass, standing for this issue would no longer be an issue.
But concerning the film, Donna, I have not seen it, but it is certainly widely regarded as a wonderful film. And so even putting aside the question of standing, I'm guessing that there's a lot of other inspirational material in it.
Yeah, we were going to do a film screening when we were still organizing around this months ago to try and get more folks kind of engaged on it. And that was one of the films that we were considering.
Delaware Interfaith Power and Light had viewings of it too around Earth Day.
Yeah, they were the one that suggested it.
Yeah, that's how I came across it.
Dustyn, you mentioned you were working with other groups. Can you name those groups that you were working with this bill?
Yeah, so if you go to the rally or sorry, the action, the yes SB 305 action, the QR code action, the list is at the bottom of the main page on that.
Okay.
It's pretty long, but that's only a real snippet. So those are the groups that have, over the course of the organizing, been attending meetings at some point. There's about 80, what are we up to? 89 organizations and faith leaders in Delaware that are behind the bill.
How do we get our faith leader to sign for it?
Yeah, so I think Shweta is still taking signatures for her letter that she has published on IPL's main website. So you could probably still sign up through her to support the bill.
Yeah, for example, Methodist Action Program is not on the list, but I've been attending the meeting, so we're definitely in it hip deep. So
yeah, we'll get you up on there. I'll send a message over to John.
Marlis, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I missed the title of the Netflix film. Would you say it again?
It's called Youth, all caps, Youth, lowercase v, all caps Gov. And it's on Netflix, Youth v Gov.
The Delaware Methodist Action Program or just Methodist Action Program?
It's just Methodist Action Program, but it essentially is Delaware.
All right. Yeah. I actually had it open, so I went ahead and added it.
So Dustyn, the letter that Shweta is working on is separate from the one that our pastor did sign on declaring climate emergency.
No,
right?
that was it. Yeah, no, that was it.
That was it? Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
I kind of corrected myself. Not this bill, but the goals of this bill. Yeah.
I'm glad we're there.
Yeah. Yeah, so we had 49, I believe, was the final number, organizational letter, separate from the faith. I mean, we had, I think, 2 faith leaders that are directly tied into the Clean Energy Coalition that, they wanted to be on both. And then Shweta is continuing to add folks to hers.
Shweta is Delaware Interfaith Power and Light.
How's your sign up list for the rally going on your website?
Not great.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the goal is to have 150 registrants, so we have 100 people actually show up, because the drop off usually is pretty steep. We're at 70 total, so we have 2 links. Sierra Club's weird. We're not allowed to send external links to our internal email list, and so we had to create an internal link. That's a national thing. So we have one that's got 20, and then there's 49 or so, or whatever the number is up now. 36.
Okay.
It's too bad that the rally isn't after a lot of the schools get out, because I think that we would get a lot of students there, if it weren't the last few days of school.
Yeah,
To change the legislative session, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is I didn't go to the last few days of school. Maybe that was just me. There's actually a number of schools. I said the same thing. And what's crazy is like Red Clay, for example. That's where I'm at, is in Red Clay. They're on their last day is the 10th. So I'm like, man, forget that last couple of days. No, but there's a number of schools apparently in Kent and Sussex and in some other and particularly charters that they're already done. They finished last week. So we have a number of student groups that have a lot of students that are already no longer in class, or this is their last week. And so we do expect a number of them to attend the rally. So I know our numbers are going to go up because we just kind of negotiated with them to get to get this out to their lists and their groups. So
I have a question about, because when I registered, there was a waiver that I had to sign and everything, or, you know, I had to agree to. But let's say some of these young people just decide to show up. I mean, you know, and they haven't signed the waiver and stuff.
yeah,
I mean,
it's a National Sierra Club thing. I don't really care if
okay. Okay.
Yeah, and the Action Network one, the tiny URL one that's in there, it doesn't even have a waiver. Yeah, it's a National Sierra Club does that.
In terms of communicating about the rally, from the Westminster standpoint, we're beyond the window of putting something in our weekly word, but it certainly is possible to send out a notice to the distribution list for our Thursday evening education events so that people who aren't here and may not know about it could at least learn about it that way. So Sally and Roger, if you want to put something together and send it out to that distribution list, that would be great.
We could also implore the pastor to mention it on Sunday morning.
Could do that. Could do that. Dave, I see that you need to leave.
Yeah.
Before we close, I just want to let you know about next week. Next Thursday evening, our topic is going to be gun violence. Certainly, it is a topic that is everywhere. It's going to be a combination of some statistics and some data, and facilitated let's talk about it to share perspectives, ideas, thoughts. And so hope that you all can be here and bring other interested parties with you. For those of you in the Wilmington area, we also want to highlight the First Friday Walk for Peace tomorrow at 5:30. It will begin in the parking lot of the Episcopal Church of St. Andrew and Matthew at 719 North Shipley Street, Orange Street, I forget, it's in between the two. And it will begin there at 5:30 and end at 6 o'clock at Rodney Square. We are encouraging everyone, in addition to participating in this silent walk in support of justice and peace, to wear orange in support of a goal of ending gun violence. So I want to be sure that you are all aware of those two events, one of which you can attend virtually, whether you're in Dover or Rehoboth or wherever, and the other locally here in Wilmington tomorrow. So hope that you will spread the word and show your support.
Yeah, a number of bills just got introduced. I don't know if there's a huge pre-file today on the legislative website, and there were 3 different bills on that. I don't know if you all got to check those out or not.
Also, I'm on DVRC, and voting by mail is expected to come up shortly as well. I don't know if it will be here this week or not, but.
Well, I love the way the legislature plans everything so that there's an equal amount of work being done on every day of the legislative session and not everything pushed to the very end. I will say I have that procrastination gene myself, so I have a certain sympathy for the process, but it's a busy month for sure. Sally or Roger, I didn't know if you wanted to close out.
Well, I would, Norm?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Epworth yesterday had a gathering was just filled with orange. And you might want to go on to Epworth, Rehoboth Beach, and you might find that they came from the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and they really dealt with it. It was really important to our pastor because she had a 20-year-old son who was killed with a pistol.
Mm.
So if you want to see that in preparation for next week, you might really find that very enlightening.
Norm, is that Epworth UMC?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, Vicky?
Vicky, that's Vicky's church, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, she lost her son. He was 20 years old when he was killed.
I didn't know that.
Well, I bought my orange shirt. They are available. Amazon will deliver them overnight, and not putting in a plug for Amazon because I don't like them, but if you want to wear orange, you can. Sally.
I wanted to say huge thanks to Dustyn, not only for being here tonight, but for all the work you've done on this bill. And it is really one of the most hopeful things that I've heard about in quite a while. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, it was definitely a team effort, and I was floored to read the bill. You know, legislators and DENREC staff and the governor's office and everybody was texting me and you know, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? I'm, you know, floored is the only response I had, because I just didn't see it, you know, didn't see it coming, to be honest, because you do get kind of beaten down over the years, you know, and then something like this pops out and you're like, holy wow. I was in the car with my wife and I'm reading, I get so car sick, and so I'm like that, you know, trying not to throw up, reading on my phone, reading the first draft that I got of it. And I'm just in there like, yes, yeah, woo. And she's just like, so you're going to tell me what's going on? Or
Well, I'm going down. I'm happy to fill my car. So seats
All right.
available.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm sorry, Marty?
Yeah, it's Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock at Trinity. There was a gathering, Moms Demand Action. Moms Demand Action. And it is particularly highlighting people who are family, friends of survivors, and sharing their experience.
There are many, many events taking place June 3rd, 4th, and 5th. If you go online, you can Google them and you can put in your zip code and it will tell you all of the activities that are being planned. So it is essential to make our voices heard and to take action to change this horrific aspect of our life as a country. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Night.
thanks for having me.
Thank you, Dustyn.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Dustyn.
Dustyn. Thank you.
Thank you.